Hi, Mark, and today I want to talk about the still existing health crisis in the UK. The winter of discontent on the island is not yet over because the government is not responding to the demands of the unions. Dissatisfaction is growing, especially among doctors and nurses, and this has serious consequences for patients. The warmer temperatures are also in the mood for spring in Great Britain. It's getting quite warm here in Germany as well. But the Central Unions for Nurses, the Royal College of Nursing, the RCN, is already looking towards the end of the year and is warning that the strikes by nurses in the NHS could last until Christmas. Nurses in British hospitals went on strike for 48 hours again over the long, or will go on strike on the long weekend over May 1st. And for the first time, emergency rooms, intensive care, and oncology units are also affected. And immediately afterwards, the members would be polled again in a primary that was announced by Pat Cullen, Secretary General of the RCN. The union's previous mandate will then expire, and if the primary election is successful, that means more strikes until right before Christmas. The winter of discontent in Great Britain is threatening to become disruptions to public life lasting more than a whole year. Although an agreement in nursing seemed in sight, the RCN members rejected the offer, a one-time payment for the past year and a salary increase of 5% from 2023, and they denied this with a majority of 54%. In addition to nursing, strikes are still the order of the day among doctors, teachers, employees in ministries and authorities, as well as in cultural institutions. An end to the strikes is only in sight in the railway and postal sectors. The approval of the union members is still pending, though. To avert further work stoppages, the government should return to the negotiating table quickly, Cullen said, and start putting more money on the table. Start treating caregivers with a little bit of decency and a little bit of respect. If there is no movement, the strikes could have even more serious effects than in the first round. At that time, the RCN had surveyed its members in the individual NHS trusts, the administrative units of the health system. Only in about half of the districts had the employees spoken out in favor of strikes, and then there was a strike. In the next round, a new ballot could lead to the strikes being extended to significantly more areas. The strikes of junior doctors, doctors who work on their specialization as specialist or general practitioners after completing their studies, have an additional impact on medical care. They went on strike for 4 days for the first time last week. The group carries weight, with junior doctors making up around 45% of the NHS medical workforce. Representatives of their union, the British Medical Association or BMA, can imagine coordinating future strikes with the nursing staff so that they have an even greater impact. Both groups have complained about significant declines in real wages in the double-digit percentage range since the financial crisis. In the past 2 years, these effects have had a particularly strong impact due to high inflation. I talked about this yesterday. And the situation in the NHS is now really threatening. That was a warning by Saffron Caudry, Chief Executive of NHS Providers, that's an umbrella organization for healthcare in England. Even before the doctor strike last week, 330,000 treatment appointments had been cancelled because of the industrial action. NHS management is now more focused on averting the bottlenecks caused by the strikes than addressing the significant backlog of treatments. In March, 7.2 million Britons were waiting for surgery or comprehensive treatment, and that's a record high. For 2.6 million of them, more than 18 weeks have passed since they were promised medical help. It is clear to me that managing the strikes does not work for the NHS. The government really needs to come to the table. That's how Caudry also called for action from Health Secretary Steve Barclay and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. But it doesn't look like that. In the past few weeks, the government has reacted only very cautiously to the demands of the striking groups and pointed out that it does not want to fuel inflation further with higher wages. And now Barclay stressed that the leadership of the RCN had persuaded members themselves to agree to the wage offer, and that another union, Unison, which includes many carers and other NHS workers, voted in favor of the proposal on Friday. Social support for the strikers remains high even after months. According to a YouGov survey, 67% still support the striking nurses and at least 59% support the doctors. In the meantime, the economic consequences of the long-lasting labor dispute are also coming into focus. The number of working days lost due to strikes was more than twice as high in the second half of 22 as in the most strike-intensive weeks of the previous 25 years. It matters because it's going on for so long. We're talking about around 6 months where the cumulative effects will be quite clear. That was said by Andrew Goodwin of the Financial Times Oxford Economics Consultancy. The performance of an industry goes back to the previous level in months without strikes, but that is not enough to compensate for the absences. Economists predict that the long-term effects will be more significant than the immediate consequences for the country's economic performance. For areas such as education and health, it is becoming more difficult to find and retain staff given the wage structures, which in turn has a significant impact on the economy as a whole. The statistics already show a significantly increased proportion of people who are not gainfully employed due to long-term health problems. Among other things, Central Bank Governor Andrew Bailey repeatedly points out that a lack of staff affects the labor market and fuels inflation. Prime Minister Sunak has yet more concerns about the renewed strike threats. He has made reducing waiting times in the NHS, along with reducing inflation and debt and strong economic growth, key objectives of his tenure. Strikes in care until Christmas will probably make this target unattainable. The economy is also increasingly suffering from the unresolved labor dispute. According to the state statistics agency ONS, the number of lost working days rose to almost 2.5 million in the past year, and this is the highest value since 1989. Economists also blame the ongoing labor disputes for the fact that economic growth in Great Britain is stagnating, and the British are the last of the major industrial nations to have only recently regained the level of prosperity from before the pandemic. However, the long-term consequences of a chronic crisis in the public healthcare system are more important than the short-term growth losses. Unlike in France and Germany, older workers in particular have withdrawn from the labor market on the island after the pandemic. One reason for this is the ailing health of many employees. And Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey recently warned that a fall in employment due to illness would have a negative impact on growth, inflation, and interest rates. And there is already a cost of living crisis. And if economic growth is held down by strikes and all of this, and by missing workers in all those areas where they already have a shortage thanks to Brexit, that will make even the cost of living crisis worse. And so they really have to find a way out of there. And the government has to act now because they decided to go on strike again. But there's one thing that has nothing to do with strikes. I forgot one thing when I talked about the different channels I have and where I said they are all in the description of the videos all the time. And Cthulhu was right. I forgot my military channel. Although I had the topic of the Ukraine war on my magazine channel yesterday, I still want to mention that I have also a channel called Outside Views Military. And a lot about politics regarding Ukraine at the moment, of course, affect that channel too, because on that channel, when there are current events with certain deliveries to Ukraine or certain other aspects with Russian military technology, those are the topics at the moment on Outside Views Military, but not the only topics. There are others with some very various videos about German stuff already. Cthulhu, you love your dingoes, I know. And so I put a lot of variants of the dingoes there, for example, because usually people talk about one system one time and that's it. But I made a ton of videos on the different variants, for example, for people interested in stuff like that. But who's just generally interested in what's going on. Um, there's also videos on the Outside Views military channel for people who are not completely deep into military technology. But it is interesting in view of the Ukraine war at the moment to get an overview. So if you never thought about going there, um, maybe you want to think twice. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.